The year is 1204, and the air above the Seine Valley is thick with the scent of burning wood and the metallic tang of fear. High upon the limestone cliffs stands the mighty fortress of Chateau Gaillard, a testament to the military genius of Richard the Lionheart. Below its towering walls, the army of King Philip II of France waits like a coiled viper, ready to strike at the heart of the Angevin Empire. The silence of the morning is shattered not by the song of birds, but by the rhythmic creaking of massive wooden beams as the French engineers prepare their engines of destruction. This is not merely a battle for stone and mortar, but a contest of wills that will decide the fate of nations. For months, the defenders inside the castle have watched the French army tighten its grip around their stronghold, cutting off all supply lines in hope of rescue. The garrison, commanded by Roger de Lacy, knows that surrender means disgrace, while resistance promises almost certain death. They look out from the battlements at a landscape transformed by war, where lush fields have been trampled into mud and the forests stripped to build siege towers. The River Seine, usually a lifeline of commerce, now serves as a barrier patrolled by enemy barges, preventing any food from reaching the starving soldiers within. The atmosphere is heavy with dread as the realization sets in that the walls, which once seemed invincible, are now their prison. Siege warfare in the Middle Ages was a brutal and complex chess game played with human lives and colossal machines. It was a time when the irresistible force of engineering innovation met the immovable object of stone fortification. Kings and generals poured their treasuries into developing weapons capable of smashing through walls, while architects designed castles to withstand the most ferocious assaults imaginable. The stakes in these conflicts were absolute, as the fall of a castle often meant the loss of an entire kingdom or province. To understand this era, we must look beyond the romanticized tales of knights and chivalry to the gritty reality of starvation, disease, and the terrifying ingenuity of medieval technology. The primary objective of any besieging army was to breach the defenses of the enemy, either by brute force or by cunning strategy. Before the advent of gunpowder, this required a mastery of physics and mechanics that seems almost impossible for the time. The earliest siege engines were derived from Roman designs, but medieval engineers refined them into terrifying new forms. Among these, the Ballista was a giant crossbow capable of firing heavy bolts with lethal precision across great distances. These weapons were used to pick off careless defenders on the walls or to skew soldiers in formation, creating a zone of death that forced the garrison to keep their heads low and their movements hidden. While the Ballista offered precision, the mangonel provided raw destructive power designed to batter stone walls and crush building roofs. This torsion-powered catapult used twisted ropes made of horsehair or sinew to store immense energy before releasing it in a violent snap. When the trigger was pulled, the throwing arm would swing up and strike a crossbar, sending a heavy stone projectile arcing through the sky. The sound of a mangonel firing was a distinct thunderclap that signaled imminent destruction for those inside the castle. These machines were difficult to aim and prone to mechanical failure, yet their ability to hurl rocks weighing up to 100 pounds made them a staple of medieval siegecraft. However, the true king of siege engines was undoubtedly the Trebuchet, a weapon that changed the face of warfare forever. Unlike the tension-based catapults, the Trebuchet relied on the simple, yet powerful principle of the counterweight. A massive wooden beam was balanced on a fulcrum with a heavy box of stones or lead attached to the short end, and a sling holding the projectile on the long end. When released, the counterweight dropped and whipped the long arm upward, launching the missile with terrifying velocity. These giants could hurl stones weighing several hundred pounds over hundreds of yards, smashing through curtain walls and crushing towers as if they were made of brittle clay. The engineering required to construct a trebuchet was immense, requiring vast amounts of timber and expert craftsmanship to ensure the machine did not tear itself apart. The largest of these engines were given names like Bad Neighbor and Warwolf, reflecting the fear they inspired in the hearts of defenders. A single well-placed shot from a heavy trebuchet could breach a wall that had taken years to build, exposing the vulnerable interior of the castle to a direct assault. The psychological impact was just as devastating as the physical damage, as the rhythmic thud of impacting stones denied the garrison any rest and slowly eroded their will to fight. Facing such terrifying weaponry, castle architects were forced to evolve their designs, creating fortifications that were more than just simple stone boxes. The motte and bailey castles of the early medieval period gave way to concentric castles, which featured rings of walls one inside the other. This design created a series of obstacles that an attacker had to overcome, ensuring that even if the outer wall was breached, the defenders could retreat to the inner ward and continue the fight. The space between the walls, known as the lists, became a killing zone, where trapped attackers were exposed to crossfire from the higher inner walls, turning a breakthrough into a bloody trap. The location of a castle was its first and most important defense, often chosen to maximize the natural advantages of the terrain. Builders sought out high cliffs, rocky outcrops, or bends in deep rivers to make the approach as difficult as possible for siege engines and infantry. A castle situated on a steep hill forced the attacking army to fight against gravity, tiring them out before they even reached the walls. Furthermore, the uneven ground made it nearly impossible to position heavy siege towers or trebuchets, effectively limiting the offensive options of the besieger. The integration of the landscape into the defensive plan was a hallmark of medieval military architecture. Surrounding the castle walls, the moat served as a formidable barrier that was far more than a simple ditch filled with water. It prevented siege towers and battering rams from reaching the stone walls, forcing the attackers to undertake the dangerous task of filling the ditch under fire. In some cases, the moat was filled with sharp stakes or diverted rivers to create a swift current that could sweep away soldiers weighed down by armor. The psychological effect of a dark, murky moat potentially filled with hidden traps added another layer of hesitation to the attacking forces. Crossing this water hazard was often the bloodiest phase of an assault. Rising from the water or the earth, the curtain walls were the primary shield of the fortress, built thick enough to withstand heavy bombardment. These walls were often topped with crenellations, which provided cover for archers and crossbowmen, allowing them to rain death upon the enemy below. The evolution of the wall included the addition of a battered plinth, a sloped base that strengthened the foundation and caused dropped stones to bounce outward into the attacking ranks. This simple geometric adjustment turned the debris of the defense into a secondary weapon, creating chaos among the soldiers trying to scale the heights or undermine the foundations. Intersecting the curtain walls were towers, which evolved from square shapes to round designs to eliminate blind spots and structural weaknesses. Square towers had corners that were vulnerable to mining and battering rams, as the masonry could be easily dislodged. Round towers deflected projectiles more effectively and provided a wider field of view for the defenders. These towers projected outward from the wall, allowing archers to shoot along the face of the curtain wall in a tactic known as enfilade fire. Any enemy attempting to place a ladder against the wall would find themselves targeted from the side, making the approach near the towers a suicide mission. The gatehouse was traditionally the weakest point of any fortification, but medieval architects transformed it into the most dangerous trap of all. To enter the castle, an attacking force had to navigate a narrow passage flanked by guard towers and overseen by murder holes in the ceiling. This choke point neutralized the numerical advantage of the besieger, forcing them to advance in a tight column that could be easily blocked. Heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bands were just the first obstacle, as the true strength of the gatehouse lay in its intricate system of active defenses designed to slaughter anyone who managed to break through. Central to the defense of the gatehouse was the portcullis, a heavy grille made of wood and iron that could be dropped instantly to block the passage. Often gatehouses were equipped with two portcullises, creating a deadly trap known as the killing box. Once the attackers breached the outer door, the first portcullis would be raised to lure them in, before the second was dropped behind them, trapping the soldiers in a confined space. From above, defenders could pour boiling oil-heated sand or quicklime through holes in the ceiling, decimating the trapped unit, without risking a single man in hand-to-hand combat. These openings in the ceiling, known as murder holes, were a terrifying surprise for soldiers who believed they had successfully breached the gate. Contrary to popular belief, boiling oil was rare due to its high cost, but boiling water and heated sand were common and equally horrific. Hot sand would work its way into the gaps of armor, causing excruciating burns that incapacitated knights and men at arms. The psychological terror of being trapped in a dark stone tunnel while burning substances rained down from above broke the morale of many assault teams before they could even strike a blow. High above the walls, machicolations provided a similar vertical defense, allowing defenders to drop heavy stones and other missiles directly onto the attackers at the base of the wall. These stone projections extended from the battlements with openings in the floor, effectively moving the defensive line outward. This eliminated the dead zone at the foot of the wall where attackers previously could hide from archer fire while working to undermine the stone. With machicolations, every inch of the perimeter was covered, ensuring that sappers and ladder teams had no safe haven to conduct their operations. Embedded within the walls and towers, arrow slits or loopholes allowed archers to fire upon the enemy while remaining almost completely protected. These narrow vertical openings flared outward on the inside, giving the archer a wide field of fire while presenting a tiny target to the enemy. A skilled marksman could suppress a large number of attackers from the safety of an arrow slit, making it difficult for the besieging army to approach without taking heavy casualties. The design of these slits evolved over time, with cross shapes and circular openings added to accommodate the use of crossbows and early firearms. At the heart of the castle stood the keep, the final refuge and the strongest point of the entire fortification. If the outer walls were breached and the bailey overrun, the defenders would retreat to this massive tower to make their last stand. The keep was often self-sufficient, containing a well for water and storage for food, allowing the garrison to hold out even after the rest of the castle had fallen. The entrance to the keep was typically located on the second floor, accessible only by a wooden staircase that could be destroyed in an emergency, cutting off the attackers from the upper levels. While stone and iron were the visible components of siege warfare, the invisible war fought underground was often the most decisive. Sapping or mining involved digging tunnels beneath the castle walls to weaken their foundations and cause them to collapse. Sappers would shore up the tunnel with wooden props and then fill the space with combustible materials like pig fat and dry wood. When the fire was lit, the props would burn away, causing the tunnel to cave in and bringing the massive stone wall above crashing down, with it creating a breach for the assault. Defenders were terrified of mining operations and would go to great lengths to detect them, often placing bowls of water on the ground to watch for ripples caused by vibrations. Once a mine was detected, the garrison would dig a counter-mine to intercept the enemy tunnel, leading to vicious underground battles fought in pitch-black darkness. These claustrophobic skirmishes were fought with picks, shovels, and daggers as men struggled for breath in the stagnant air. The collapse of a tunnel during these fights was a constant danger, burying friend and foe alike in a tomb of earth and stone. One of the most famous examples of successful mining occurred during the siege of Rochester Castle in 1215 by King John of England. After weeks of bombardment failed to breach the massive keep, John ordered his sappers to dig beneath the southeast tower. To fuel the fire that would bring down the tower, he famously ordered 40 of the fattest pigs to be slaughtered and their fat used to burn the wooden props. The resulting collapse brought down a quarter of the keep, but incredibly, the defenders held out in the remaining section behind a cross wall, demonstrating the incredible resilience of medieval fortifications. Beyond the mechanical and structural aspects, biological warfare played a grim role in the sieges of the Middle Ages. Besieging armies would sometimes catapult the carcasses of dead animals or even plague victims over the walls to spread disease among the crowded defenders. The spread of dysentery, cholera, and the plague could devastate a garrison faster than any arrow or sword, turning the castle into a festering trap. This ruthless tactic exploited the poor sanitation and lack of medical knowledge of the time, weaponizing nature itself against the stubborn resistance of the enemy. However, the most common weapon in siege warfare was not the trebuchet or the mine, but the slow, agonizing grip of starvation. A siege was fundamentally a battle of logistics, where the army that could feed itself the longest usually won. Commanders would encircle a castle and simply wait for the food supplies inside to run out, knowing that hunger would eventually force a surrender. The defenders faced the heartbreaking choice of expelling useless mouths such as women, children, and the elderly to save rations for the fighting men. These outcasts were often trapped between the walls and the enemy lines, left to die of exposure and hunger, in full view of their kin. The psychological strain of a long siege was immense, testing the loyalty and discipline of the soldiers on both sides. For the besiegers, the boredom and disease of the camp could lead to desertion and mutiny, while the defenders faced the constant terror of assault and the gnawing pain of hunger. Commanders used propaganda and terror tactics to break the will of the enemy, displaying the heads of executed prisoners on pikes, or taunting the garrison with feasts held just out of arrow range. The mental fortitude required to endure months of isolation and deprivation was as vital as the thickness of the walls. To overcome the stalemate of a blockade, attackers would construct siege towers or belfries, massive wooden structures on wheels that equaled the height of the castle walls. Covered in wet animal hides to prevent them from being set on fire, these towers were pushed slowly toward the defenses, protecting the soldiers inside. Once the tower reached the wall, a drawbridge would drop, allowing a stream of knights to storm the battlements and bypass the vertical defenses. The sight of a siege tower inching closer was a terrifying spectacle for the defenders, who knew that hand-to-hand combat was imminent. Defenders countered these wooden giants with fire, the ancient enemy of all siege engines. Incendiary mixtures, including pitch, tar, and early forms of Greek fire, were hurled at the towers in an attempt to ignite the timber frame. Greek fire was a particularly feared substance, a liquid flame that could burn even on water and was nearly impossible to extinguish. The desperate crews of the siege towers would frantically try to douse the flames with water or vinegar, while arrows rained down around them. A burning siege tower became a towering inferno, roasting the men trapped inside and halting the assault in its tracks. The pinnacle of medieval siege engineering was reached under the reign of King Edward I of England, known as Longshanks. During his campaigns in Scotland, he demonstrated a ruthless mastery of siegecraft, culminating in the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304. Edward refused to accept a surrender until he had tested his ultimate weapon, a trebuchet of such colossal size that it took months to build. He named this mechanical monster the Warwolf, and its construction required the timber of entire forests and the labor of 50 carpenters working day and night. The Warwolf was a counterweight trebuchet of unprecedented scale, capable of hurling stones weighing 300 pounds with devastating accuracy. When the garrison of Stirling Castle saw the machine being assembled, they offered to surrender, immediately terrified of the destruction it would bring. But Edward possessed a cold curiosity and rejected their offer, stating that he did not go to such trouble only to leave his weapon unused. He ordered the garrison to return to the castle and prepare for the bombardment, turning the siege into a live fire demonstration of his military power. When the Warwolf finally fired, the impact was catastrophic, smashing through the curtain wall of Stirling Castle as if it were made of glass. The massive projectile shattered masonry and timber alike, creating a breach that made further resistance futile. This event marked the zenith of the trebuchet dominance, demonstrating that no stone fortification could stand indefinitely against the focused application of physics and engineering. The terror inspired by the Warwolf cemented Edward's reputation as the hammer of the Scots and showcased the terrifying potential of kinetic bombardment. Yet even as the trebuchet reached its peak, a new technology was emerging from the east that would render all medieval castles obsolete. The arrival of gunpowder and the cannon in Europe signaled the end of the Age of Stone and the beginning of the Age of Fire. Early cannons known as bombards were crude and dangerous, often exploding and killing their crews, but they possessed a destructive power that no trebuchet could match. These iron monsters fired stone or iron balls with a flat trajectory, smashing into walls with a force that shattered the very foundations of the fortress. The transition was slow at first, as early cannons were inaccurate and slow to reload, but their potential was undeniable. The vertical walls of medieval castles, designed to stop climbing soldiers and gravity-based projectiles, were incredibly vulnerable to the direct impact of cannonballs. A high, thin wall that could deflect an arrow or a trebuchet stone would simply crumble under the horizontal force of a gunpowder blast. Architects scrambled to adapt, lowering walls and thickening them with earth to absorb the shock, but the era of the impregnable stone giant was drawing to a close. The definitive end of the medieval castle came in 1453 with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. The Theodosian walls, which had protected the city for 1,000 years and withstood countless sieges, faced the great bombard of Sultan Mehmed II. This massive bronze cannon fired a 1,200-pound stone ball that pulverized the ancient masonry, reducing the legendary fortifications to rubble. The sound of the great bombard firing could be heard for miles, a thunderous announcement that the old world was dying and a new order was rising from the dust. In response to the cannon, military architecture evolved into the Star Fort, or Trace Italian, a design that bore little resemblance to the romantic castles of the past. These new forts featured low, thick walls made of brick and earth, designed to absorb cannon fire rather than resist it. The geometric angles of the star shape allowed defenders to create killing zones with their own cannons, eliminating the blind spots that had plagued earlier designs. The romantic silhouette of towers and battlements was replaced by the functional, grim efficiency of bastions and bunkers. The legacy of medieval siege warfare remains etched into the landscape of Europe, where ruined castles stand as silent monuments to this violent era. These stone skeletons tell the story of a time when the limits of human ingenuity were pushed in the service of conquest and survival. From the terrifying snap of the mangonel to the thunder of the first cannons, the evolution of siegecraft drove the development of technology and architecture in equal measure. We look upon these ruins now with awe, but we must remember the fear and desperation that once filled their halls. Ultimately, the history of siege warfare is a testament to the eternal arms race between offense and defense. It is a story of how necessity drove invention, creating machines of nightmare and fortresses of defiance. The Trebuchet and the castle wall were the atomic weapons and bunkers of their day, defining the balance of power for centuries. As we walk the ramparts of Chateau Gaillard or stand in the shadow of the great keeps, we are witnessing the physical remnants of a struggle that shaped the modern world, leaving an indelible mark on history.